In the news tonight, Mahmoud Abbas confirms a deal was reached with Israel following talks between officials from both sides to transfer $470 million of withheld tax revenues to the Palestinian Authority. Daesh terrorists claimed their first suicide attack in Afghanistan that killed 33 and wounded more than 100 people outside a bank in Jalalabad. And Italy appeals for more decisive action on a European level to cope with the huge numbers of refugees in the Mediterranean fleeing war zones in Africa and the Middle East. Good evening and welcome to a new edition of the news. Here are the details. Israel said it would transfer $470 million of withheld tax revenues to the Palestinian Authority following talks between officials from both sides. In a statement, an Israeli government official confirmed the move, saying it was meant to ensure regional stability and for humanitarian considerations. In December, Israel began withholding around $130 million per month of taxes it collects on behalf of the Palestinians after the authority announced it was joining the ICC. But following international pressure, Israel agreed to resume the transfers only after deducting money the Palestinians owed for utilities and medical treatment. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas then rejected the deducted amount, saying either Israel pays in full or the Palestinian Authority goes to arbitration or to the ICC.
An agreement was reached to send 3 months' worth of funds in full, and the joint Palestinian-Israeli committee will discuss all the amounts that belong to us and what we owe. All the amounts will be calculated, and whatever we agree on, we will accept.
In the ongoing fight against Daesh in Iraq and Syria, U.S. and allied forces launched 20 airstrikes since early yesterday. The combined joint task force leading the operations said there were 7 airstrikes in Syria using attack and bomber aircraft near Kobani and Al-Hasaka. And in Iraq, 13 airstrikes were launched using fighter and attack aircraft as well as drones near Biji, Ramadi, Al-Asad, Fallujah, Sinjar, Heat and Tal Afar. In Iraq, meanwhile, Iraqi ground forces secured the perimeter around the country's biggest oil refinery and entered the vast complex amid heavy clashes with Daesh terrorists. A top military commander in Salahuddin province said ground forces entered and retook most of the Biji oil refinery today, reversing gains made by the terrorists who carried out a large-scale attack and briefly took over a small part of the complex this week. Yesterday, Iraqi soldiers backed by U.S.-led coalition airstrikes and militias gained control of the towns of Al-Malha and Al-Mazra'a, some 3 kilometers south of the Biji refinery. Over to Yemen, where medical and military sources said 52 people were killed in the last 24 hours in fighting between loyalists of President Abd Rabbu Mansour Hadi, backed by the Saudi-led coalition, and Houthi rebels. 19 rebels were among the dead, according to these sources. Elsewhere in the country, 9 more rebels were killed in 2 ambushes by Hadi forces near the city of Dalia, north of Aden. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia has pledged to provide for the cost of United Nations emergency aid to the country as airstrikes against the Houthis continue. The official Saudi news agency said it has promised $274 million in humanitarian aid. The United Nations says relief aid is needed for some 12 million who are short of food. The death toll is rising in Afghanistan's eastern city of Jalalabad following a suicide bomb attack earlier today. At least 33 people are confirmed dead and 100 injured in the blast, which took place outside a bank where government staff and military personnel were collecting their salaries. We would like to draw your attention to the graphic images you are about to see. Taliban group saying Taliban group distanced itself from the attack, saying in a statement they have nothing to do with the explosion and condemned it. A group claiming to represent Daesh in Afghanistan declared responsibility, saying the attacker was targeting government workers. The claim, if confirmed, is the first in Afghanistan by the terrorist group. Police said another bomb was discovered nearby and was destroyed in a controlled explosion. Another blast earlier in the day was reported outside a shrine in Jalalabad, but there were no reports of casualties. Iran marked National Army Day with a military parade attended by President Hassan Rouhani, who again called for dialogue to resolve the crisis in Yemen and said Iran's military deployment is only for deterrence purposes. The parade was held at the country's late leader Ayatollah Khomeini's mausoleum, starting with a procession of veterans who fought in the Iran-Iraq war. Here's more.
Iran's military might on full display on National Army Day. President Hassan Rouhani attended the annual ceremony that marks the establishment of the Islamic Republic's army. This show of power comes amid heightening tensions between Tehran and the Saudis over Yemen, where Iranian-backed Houthi rebels have been targeted for 3 weeks by airstrikes led by Saudi Arabia. Rouhani said Tehran had deployed warships of Yemen's coast to ensure the security of countries in the region.
Our strategy is deterrence strategy, deterrence for establishing peace and security in Iran and the Middle East.
Iran has condemned the Saudi campaign and called for dialogue. Saudi Arabia accuses Tehran of providing military support to the Houthis, a charge Tehran denies.
Back here at home, the 8th Government Leadership Forum, organized by the Ministry of Public Sector Development, convened at the Royal Cultural Centre today. Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour addressed the meeting, urging intensified efforts to realize needed public reforms to improve sectors badly hit by regional political turmoil, such as foreign aid, tourism, trade and aviation. Minister of Public Sector Development Khalifa presented the meeting with a summary of a report prepared by his ministry that measures Jordan's public performance against 21 international indicators. Khawalde said indicators such as competitiveness, unemployment, foreign policy, among others, provide an early warning of public sector performance that needs to be improved or that ranks high and must be promoted. The report will be issued annually during the first quarter of each year to keep decision makers abreast with key indicators. Jordan's ranking affects its share of international cooperation and assistance and influences foreign investments, according to the report. After 2 days of meetings in Washington, D.C., finance ministers of the group of 20 leading economies struck a hopeful tone on the outlook for global growth. In a communiqué, finance ministers and central bankers welcomed brighter economic signs in rich nations, but said there were weaknesses in emerging markets. However, the group of developed and emerging market nations, representing around 80% of global economic output, cited challenges from exchange rate volatility and geopolitical tensions. The communiqué said the main worry centers on emerging markets, which have been beset by capital outflows as investors place bets on higher U.S. interest rates, but that nations could protect themselves by taking steps to curb sharp capital movements. Pope Francis joined Italy in pressing the European Union to do more to help the country cope with rapidly mounting numbers of desperate people rescued in the Mediterranean during journeys on smugglers' boats to flee war, persecution, or poverty. Italian President Sergio Mattarella has also repeated the call for more decisive action on a European level to cope with the huge numbers fleeing war zones in Africa and the Middle East. The appeals echoed as migrants, mostly Somalis, set foot on Palermo's docks after being rescued in past days by merchant vessels and Italian Coast Guard boats. Here's the story.
A boat carrying more than 90 migrants arrived at a port in Palermo, Sicily Saturday after being rescued at sea. More and more migrants anxious to escape conflict in North Africa and the Middle East are making the dangerous and often deadly crossing into European territory. International aid organizations estimate around 20,000 migrants have reached the Italian coast this year. About 1,000 people have drowned. The Italian Coast Guard continues to play a role in rescue efforts. A Somali woman and her sick baby were taken to a hospital on an Italian island Friday after their small boat was rescued by a Maltese container ship. The other migrants who remained on board the ship are part of some 13,000 people rescued over the past week alone as sailing conditions improve in the region.
The fabled story of Hannibal leading his Carthaginian army across the Alps to face the Roman Republic was given a modern reimagining. The Rettenbach Glacier in Zollden, Austria was transformed into a giant historic stage to tell the story of the Carthaginians' crossing of the Alps to reach Rome. With a cast of 500, the show featured snowplows as elephants and skiers, and climbers and skydivers as modern-day warriors. We begin with football and the La Liga. Barcelona extended their lead at the top of La Liga back to 5 points clear of Real Madrid after their 2-0 win over Valencia at Nou Camp. Barca went ahead inside a minute as Lionel Messi laid on an assist for Luis Suarez to slot home. But Valencia could have leveled a minute later as Claudio Bravo saved a penalty from Dani Parejo given after a foul by Gerard Piqué. And past the 90 minutes, Lionel Messi hit the woodwork with a free kick. And with the last kick of the game, he slotted home his 400th goal. And in tennis and the Fed Cup, world number 1 Serena Williams was made to battle hard by Camilla Giorgi of Italy. Williams took the first set on a tie-break before showing her class in the second set. With her 7-6, 6-2 win, she gave the USA a 1-love lead in the World Group playoff. But Italy fought back later in the day as Sara Errani easily dispatched Lauren Davis. Errani won 6-1, 6-2 to leave the tie intriguingly poised going into the doubles and reverse singles matches tomorrow. And finally, a quick look at the weather. It continues to be relatively cold for the rest of tonight in most regions with northwesterly moderate winds. Tomorrow, a slight rise in temperature is expected, creating moderate spring conditions across the country. The Gulf of Aqaba can expect a hot day with northerly moderate to fresh winds and slightly high seas. Here now is our temperatures forecast for tonight and tomorrow. And to close, here's a reminder of the day's top stories. Mahmoud Abbas confirms a deal was reached with Israel following talks between officials from both sides to transfer $470 million of withheld tax revenues to the Palestinian Authority. Daesh terrorists claimed their first suicide attack in Afghanistan that killed 33 and wounded more than 100 people outside a bank in Jalalabad. And Italy appeals for more decisive action on a European level to cope with the huge numbers of refugees in the Mediterranean fleeing war zones in Africa and the Middle East. And with this, we come to the end of this edition of the news. I'm Alia Tuqan. Thank you for joining us and have a good night.